his soul, offer, and spared his life.
In ancient times, a formidable warrior known as the Scorpion King had dominated countless battles, earning a fearsome reputation across the lands. Yet even the mightiest fall, and in one decisive conflict, he was defeated. Stripped of his forces and abandoned in a barren desert, he watched helplessly as his loyal companions perished one by one beneath the scorching sun. Left alone, he knelt in desperate prayer, pledging to a higher power. If his life were spared, he would rise to vanquish his enemies, and only after fulfilling this vow would he willingly surrender his own life. Miraculously, his plea was answered. A divine force granted him command of a powerful army, placing him at the helm. With this celestial backing, he launched a relentless campaign, crushing all opposition. True to his word, once his foes were defeated, his life was claimed, and the army he had led was returned to the desolate sands where they had first fallen. And so time moved on, centuries stretching into millennia, yet the Scorpion King and his warriors remained motionless, entombed in the sands of history. Fast forward to the present. Rick and Evelyn, now married, have a spirited young son, and together they continue their adventurous pursuits. During an expedition at the very site of the Scorpion King's ancient battle, Evelyn uncovers a hidden chamber. Inside, she discovers a mysterious box containing a bracelet once worn by the Scorpion King. Unaware of the warning inscribed upon it, that opening the box would summon the waters of the River Nile, the couple inadvertently triggers a flood, barely escaping with their lives. They return home, far from Egypt, with the artifact in tow. Meanwhile, elsewhere, treasure hunters dig at the site where a long-dead priest had fallen, recovering his lost book of revival. Incredibly, they also uncover the priest's preserved body, long thought missing. A young woman, bearing a striking resemblance to the priest's beloved from a past life, arrives at the scene. These individuals quickly learn that Rick and Evelyn possess the bracelet and set off to claim it. Back at home, the O'Connell's son innocently slips the bracelet onto his wrist, only to witness a vision, a vast desert dotted with pyramids. As he struggles to remove it, he finds it fused to his arm, forcing him to conceal it within his coat. The antagonists, including the guardian of Pharaoh's tomb who has lived to protect its secrets, pursue Evelyn and the bracelet. Despite his warnings, Evelyn is taken by force, leaving Rick in pursuit. Guided by a photograph, he learns of the leader orchestrating the abduction. Alex, now holding the bracelet, recognizes this figure as a museum worker. They rush to the museum, aware of the grave consequences. Once the bracelet is worn, the Scorpion King will awaken within 7 days, and whoever controls him will command his legendary army. To prevent catastrophe, they must also revive the powerful priest, whose magic could counter the Scorpion King and protect the world. Arriving at the museum, they are shocked to find the box empty. In a tense standoff, Evelyn is threatened with immolation as the priest is summoned back to life. Before him stands the young woman, her soul reborn, remembering her past. The stage is set for a confrontation where ancient forces, human courage, and mystical relics collide. Meanwhile, Rick and his team manage to rescue Evelyn from the clutches of the priest, but their relief is short-lived. The Dark Sorcerer has already resurrected his army of mummies, sending them in relentless pursuit. Worse still, he has taken Rick and Evelyn's young son hostage. On board a moving train, the priest, the mysterious young woman, and their accomplices keep a watchful eye on the boy. Approaching him, the priest speaks with chilling authority, explaining that the bracelet he now wears not only connects him to the Scorpion King, but also reveals the precise location where the ancient warrior will awaken. Back on the ground, Rick and Evelyn are consumed with fear for their son's safety. Desperate, Evelyn turns to a friend who owns a hot air balloon, pleading for help to reach the location where their child is being held. Meanwhile, the boy, quick-witted and brave, manages to escape the train. His path leads him to an ancient castle, where visions of the Scorpion King's imminent revival unfold before his eyes. But before he can act, the priest recaptures him, asserting his control once more. At the same time, the priest performs a remarkable ritual with the young woman, whose soul is linked to a previous life he had cherished. Using his ancient book, he restores her memories, flooding her mind with long-forgotten knowledge. Through this, Evelyn herself begins to see the past, realizing that she is the reincarnation of a pharaoh's daughter, a princess who once witnessed the murder of her father and the plundering of her treasures. These visions explain her uncanny familiarity with ancient relics, secret texts, and mystical artifacts. Determined to rescue their son, Rick and Evelyn pursue the priest's train via the hot air balloon. But when they board it, the boy is gone. Nearby, a detailed sand model reveals the exact location the priest intends to reach. The sorcerer, anticipating their move, uses his dark powers to lift a massive surge of water, destroying the balloon and forcing Rick and Evelyn to continue on foot. With the guardian by their side, they push forward through a dense forest, encountering a battalion of the priest's smaller mummies. In a fierce skirmish, they dispatch most of the undead minions, but the danger is far from over. Rick finally spots his son and scoops him up, racing against time, the bracelet's power threatening the boy's life if they do not reach the pyramid in time. As dawn nears, Rick leaps toward the pyramid with his son, barely making it inside. The bracelet, sensing the threat, detaches from the boy's wrist and is cast aside, but triumph turns to horror. The young woman, possessed by the priest's dark affection, strikes down Evelyn. Rick's heart sinks as he witnesses her fall, fueling a burning desire for revenge. Inside the pyramid, the priest and his accomplice are confronted by sinister black forces sent by the Scorpion King himself. They strip the priest of his magical abilities, ensuring no one will rival the ancient warrior's power once he rises. Elsewhere, the museum worker, the same man who orchestrated the Scorpion King's resurrection, finds the mystical bracelet. A massive scorpion insignia marks the spot where he places his hand, triggering the revival of the Scorpion King and his formidable army. Outside, the Guardian readies his own forces, prepared to intercept the Scorpion King's army before it can wreak global devastation. Meanwhile, Evelyn's son and brother grieve her loss, but her brother offers a glimmer of hope. With the priest's book, the dead can be revived. One day, their beloved mother will return. Rick, Evelyn, her brother, and their son push deeper into the pyramid, navigating its labyrinthine corridors. Spotting the girl who had been aligned with the priest, they cleverly snatch the ancient book from her hands. With the boy's knowledge of the ancient Egyptian script, he begins chanting the incantations, and in a brilliant flash, Evelyn is restored to life. Immediately, Evelyn faces off against the young woman, both of them locked in a fierce struggle fueled by their conflicting loyalties. Meanwhile, the priest, consumed by vengeance, is determined to awaken the Scorpion King to consolidate power and annihilate all opposition. As he starts the dark ritual, Rick arrives just in time, challenging him and sparking a titanic battle between the two. Their clash shakes the very stones of the pyramid. Suddenly, the air trembles and the door bursts open, marking the revival of the Scorpion King. Half man, half scorpion, he emerges more powerful and terrifying than ever. The priest, now fully human and devoid of any supernatural protection, recoils in fear. Realizing his own mortality against the ancient warrior, he prostrates himself, pleading for mercy and swearing fealty. Pointing at Rick, he warns the Scorpion King that this man seeks his life. The Scorpion King turns toward Rick, who, knowing he cannot match the sheer strength of the ancient being, retreats to preserve his life. As he flees, Rick notices carvings etched into a stone nearby, depicting a man striking the Scorpion King with a bayonet. Understanding this as a crucial clue, he calls to Evelyn's brother, who is holding a matching weapon. He instructs him to hurl it at the Scorpion King, but the priest, ever cunning, intercepts the bayonet, deciding to seize the opportunity for himself. Believing he can now control the outcome, he launches it at the Scorpion King, intent on claiming ultimate power. Amid the chaos, Rick sets the surrounding area ablaze, drawing the Scorpion King's attention. As the priest's bayonet flies, Rick intercepts it, and in a desperate act, plunges it into the Scorpion King, ending the ancient warrior's threat. Outside, the Guardian continues his battle against the remaining army, halting their advance now that the Scorpion King has fallen. Inside the pyramid, the structure collapses around them. The earth splits open, revealing a mass of dark, writhing souls pulling both Rick and the priest toward the abyss. Evelyn refuses to leave her husband behind, anchoring herself and saving Rick from certain death. The priest, desperate and betrayed, calls out to the girl he had revived and loved for millennia, but she abandons him to save herself. Heartbroken and alone, he plunges into the chasm, where the dark souls claim him. The girl, fleeing the collapse, tumbles into a pit teeming with venomous creatures, meeting a grim end herself. Only Rick, Evelyn, their son, and Evelyn's brother remain. Battling a raging storm and debris, they climb to the pyramid's summit. The hot air balloon arrives just in time, lifting them to safety. Evelyn's brother spots a dazzling diamond atop the pyramid and retrieves it before they depart. As the balloon rises above the ruins, the Guardian salutes them from below, acknowledging their triumph. Once again, they have averted a cataclysm, surviving a battle that spanned centuries of curses, betrayals, and supernatural warfare. With that, their harrowing adventure comes to a close. You know, The Mummy Returns is one of those sequels that makes you scratch your head and grin at the same time. Honestly, I can't tell you if it's brilliant or completely over the top, because, well, it's a little bit of both. From the very first frame, it hits hard with that familiar adventure energy. You've got explosions, chases, curses, and of course, the O'Connells, now married, and with a kid who somehow already knows more about archaeology than any of us ever will. Here's the thing, it's fun, really fun. You can't deny that. There's a certain unpretentious joy in watching Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz tumble through ancient tombs, outrun mummies, and deliver one-liners that make you chuckle, even if they're not Shakespeare. But at the same time, it's messy, overstuffed, loud to the point where your ears might start questioning life choices. You've got 3 villains, magical artifacts everywhere, flashbacks, and a kid in danger subplot that pops up so often you wonder if they actually let the child breathe between scenes. And that's exactly what makes this sequel so divisive. Some people love it. They sit back, grab their popcorn, and enjoy 2 hours of nonstop chaos, knowing full well it's ridiculous and not taking itself seriously. Others, well, they get a headache, too many moving pieces, too much CGI, too many moments where the hero shows up at just the right second every single time. For me, it's like one of those rides you can't help but enjoy, even if the harness feels a little loose. It's messy, sometimes dumb, but there's a pulse to it, a certain energy that makes you want to see what crazy thing happens next. And hey, for a family looking for a Saturday night adventure, it works. Just don't expect subtlety or deep storytelling. So yeah, The Mummy Returns is fun, but also wildly divisive. Some people will cheer the chaos, others will groan through it. And somehow, that's exactly what makes watching it kind of addictive. Alright, so let's talk about how The Mummy Returns stacks up against the 1999 original. Right off the bat, you can tell it's trying to capture the same magic, the same mix of adventure, humor, and supernatural chaos that made the first one so much fun. Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz are back. The chemistry is still there, and the sense of a globe-trotting, ancient curse kind of adventure is fully dialed in. But here's the catch, it doesn't quite have that same spark. The first Mummy had a freshness to it. You didn't know exactly what was coming next. The scares, the humor, the tension, it all felt balanced, even if it leaned heavily on spectacle. The sequel, though, it feels inflated. Like someone took the original, pumped it full of more villains, more magic, more artifacts, and cranked the volume to 11. It's fun, don't get me wrong, but it's not the same fun. There's a sense that it's following a formula now. The writers and director know what worked before, and they're doubling down on it. You get the same kind of mummy rolling through the San sequences, the same one-liners, and the same dynamic between the O'Connells. Even the basic plot beats echo the first film, resurrection, ancient curses, high-stakes chases, just bigger, louder, and maybe a little overstuffed. So if you loved the original, this sequel is like a bigger, flashier second helping. You'll recognize all the ingredients, and for the most part, it delivers. But if you were hoping for something that feels as tight and clever as the first, you might come away feeling it's just a slightly messy remix. It's a sequel that knows what people loved in 1999, and it's trying to give it to you again, only now with extra explosions. Stephen Sommers has a very specific adventure movie brain, and you can feel it all over The Mummy Returns. He doesn't make this world feel quiet or mysterious for very long. He wants everything moving. Somebody opens a tomb, somebody reads the wrong inscription, somebody gets chased, somebody cracks a joke, and before you've even settled into the scene, the movie is already dragging you into the next disaster. And honestly, that is both his strength and his weakness. Sommers clearly loves that old-school adventure formula. You can feel the Indiana Jones flavor in the way he builds danger around ancient objects, hidden temples, exotic locations, secret histories, and villains who are always two steps away from unleashing something terrible. It's very good versus evil, very broad, very pulpy. Nobody here is operating in subtle shades of morality. The heroes are charming, the villains are cursed or power-hungry, and the ancient world is basically one giant trap waiting for Brendan Fraser to walk into it. But there's also something kind of refreshing about how shameless it is. Sommers is not embarrassed by the cliches. He leans into them. The romance, the one-liners, the sand, the monsters, the grand music, the impossible escapes, he treats all of it like part of the fun. He knows this is not a museum lecture. This is the kind of movie where archaeology means punching undead soldiers and flying across the desert in an airship. The problem is, Sommers sometimes gets so excited by the toys that he forgets to let the story breathe. His adventure style is packed with energy, but it can also feel overloaded. Every scene wants to be a set piece. Every threat has to be bigger than the last one. Every quiet moment gets interrupted before it has a chance to land. Still, I do think his enthusiasm matters. Even when The Mummy Returns is messy, it never feels cold or lifeless. It has that big Saturday matinee spirit, loud, silly, romantic, dangerous, and completely committed to giving the audience a ride. Sommers may not always know when to stop, but he absolutely knows the kind of adventure he wants to make. Let's be real for a second. The Mummy Returns exists because the first movie made a ton of money. I mean, that's Hollywood 101, right? You have a hit, you make a sequel, and you crank everything up a notch. Bigger explosions, more monsters, more money spent on effects, and yes, a few new characters just to keep it fresh. You can feel that in almost every scene. From the very start, it's like the filmmakers said, okay, the audience loved Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz. They liked the scares and the action. Let's give them more of all of it and just make it louder. And that's exactly what they did. There's the kid, Alex, who's basically a walking plot device. There's the Scorpion King, who exists mainly so he can have his own spin-off later. And the mythology, oh yeah, it's expanded just enough to justify all the new CGI monsters and the bigger-than-life set pieces. You can tell the sequel was built around a formula. Take everything that worked before, inflate it, and add a little bit of cash grab fanfare on top. It's not necessarily evil. If you enjoyed the first film, you're going to get that same thrill right again, but it does make you notice how calculated it all is. Every chase, every mummy attack, every over-the-top magical sequence feels engineered to wow the audience and keep the franchise rolling. And that's fine. Blockbusters are supposed to entertain. But there's a difference between expanding a story and expanding a checklist of audience-pleasing moments. In The Mummy Returns, it often feels more like the latter. The movie knows what it needs to hit: laughs, scares, action, romance, the big bad. And it hits all of them. Problem is, sometimes you can almost see the calculations happening behind the camera, like the filmmakers are thinking, okay, explosion here, monster there, now a chase, and throw in a joke. At the end of the day, that's the commercial motivation shining through. It's a sequel built to sell tickets, set up spin-offs, and keep the franchise alive. And hey, it works. The theater was packed, families are entertained, kids are screaming with excitement, mission accomplished. But for those of us hoping for something that grows organically from the first story, yeah, it's a little harder to swallow. In short, the sequel knows exactly what it's doing commercially, and it's unapologetic about it. It's big, it's flashy, it's calculated, and whether you love that or hate, it depends entirely on how much you're willing to buy into a popcorn adventure designed by the numbers. So the basic setup of The Mummy Returns is actually pretty simple at first, at least before the movie starts throwing every ancient curse in the drawer at us. Rick and Evelyn are back, but now they're not just flirting through danger like in the first movie. They're married, they have a son, Alex. They live in London. And of course, because this family apparently cannot touch an artifact without starting an apocalypse, Alex ends up with the bracelet of Anubis on his wrist. That bracelet is the thing everyone wants. It is tied to the Scorpion King, the army of Anubis, and basically the next world-ending disaster waiting to happen. Alex starts getting visions from it, the bad guys come after him, and suddenly the movie turns into this huge rescue mission across museums, deserts, temples, and whatever supernatural nightmare is next on the schedule. At the same time, Imhotep is back again, because naturally, The Mummy Returns, it's right there in the title. His followers resurrect him, Ankh-Sunamun is pulled back into the story, and Imhotep has his own plan involving the Scorpion King's power. So now Rick and Evelyn are not just trying to save their son, they're also trying to stop Imhotep from getting control of an undead army. And that's where the movie becomes both fun and kind of ridiculous. You have one villain returning from the first film, another ancient warrior being built up as an even bigger threat, a magical bracelet guiding a child through visions, and an army of jackal soldiers waiting to be unleashed. It's a lot. Maybe too much, but it does give the film that breathless adventure structure where every scene has a reason to move. The emotional hook, though, is the family. Strip away all the Egyptian mythology and CGI chaos, and the story is really about Rick and Evelyn trying to get Alex back. That's the part that keeps the movie grounded, even when the plot is spinning around with mummies, reincarnation, curses, and giant scorpion monsters. So yes, the premise is overstuffed. It probably has 3 movies worth of supernatural nonsense packed into one sequel, but as a Saturday night adventure setup, it works. You know who the heroes are, you know the world is in danger, and you know Brendan Fraser is going to punch, shoot, or sarcastically complain his way through whatever ancient evil shows up next. Okay, so here's the thing, The Mummy Returns is packed. I mean, really packed. By the time you hit the midpoint, you're juggling resurrected mummies, reincarnated lovers, ancient curses, magical bracelets, visions, a kid in danger, multiple villainous armies, and the ever-introduced Scorpion King. And that's just scratching the surface. It's fun, don't get me wrong. The movie keeps moving, the stakes are high, and there's always something new exploding on the screen. But man, the plot. It's like a bowl of spaghetti. You know there's something substantial in there, but it's all tangled together and impossible to fully follow. I swear, I spent half the time just trying to figure out who was on whose side and why everyone suddenly knew what they were supposed to do next. The mythology is definitely overcomplicated. They try to weave Imhotep, Ankh-Sunamun, the Scorpion King, the bracelet of Anubis, and some kind of 5,000-year-old army all into one story, and the result is chaotic. You get flashes of ancient rituals, visions, reincarnations, backstory dumps, and then, bam, another chase or fight sequence. It's like the movie never stops long enough to explain itself, and honestly, maybe it doesn't want to. And yet, despite all the confusion, there's still a sense of clarity in a weird way. You always know who the good guys are, and you know who the bad guys are. That might be the only thing keeping you invested, rooting for the O'Connells, hoping Alex doesn't get eaten by a swarm of undead or caught in some mystical trap. So yeah, the mythology and plot are tangled, overstuffed, and sometimes head-scratchingly confusing. But if you can suspend disbelief and ignore the fact that half the time you're not entirely sure why certain magic rules exist, it's still a wild ride. A messy, overcomplicated, gloriously over-the-top ride, but a ride nonetheless. Now, one thing you start noticing pretty quickly with The Mummy Returns is how often it feels like the movie is looking back at the first one and going, okay, that worked, let's do it again, but bigger. And sometimes that's fun. I mean, sequels do this all the time. You bring back the familiar ingredients, you remind the audience why they liked the original, and you give them another round of the same flavor. But here, the repetition is not exactly subtle. Imhotep is resurrected again. Ancient curses are back again. The world is in danger again. Our heroes are racing against time again. There's another magical object, another ancient ritual, another army waiting to be unleashed, another big supernatural threat tied to Egypt's past. It's not just a sequel. At points, it feels like the first movie has been reassembled, with extra parts glued onto it. You can really feel that in the set pieces. The first film had that iconic sandstorm imagery, so this one gives us another version of that kind of spectacle. The Book of the Dead-style climax gets echoed again. The whole idea of reading ancient words at exactly the right dramatic moment comes back. Even the rhythm feels familiar. Discover artifact, unleash danger, run from monsters, crack a joke, repeat. And look, I'm not against a movie repeating itself if the energy is still there. Sometimes that comfort food quality is exactly what people want. You want Brendan Fraser fighting mummies. The movie gives you Brendan Fraser fighting mummies. You want creepy ancient tombs and ridiculous escapes. It gives you those too. But there's a difference between continuing a formula and just recycling it. That's where The Mummy Returns starts to feel a little lazy. Instead of finding a genuinely fresh angle, it often just grabs what worked before and turns up the noise. More monsters, more chases, more CGI, more danger, but not always more imagination. And after a while, you can almost predict the rhythm. Someone is in trouble, someone else arrives at the last possible second, the music swells, a creature attacks, and then the movie charges into the next sequence before you can think too hard about it. The first couple of times, fine. By the third or fourth, you start to feel the machinery. That's the strange thing about this sequel. It has so much going on, yet it can still feel familiar to a fault. It's busy, but not always fresh, loud, but not always surprising. Still, for fans of the original, that may not be a deal-breaker. There is a certain pleasure in returning to this world and seeing the same kind of madness play out again. But if you're looking for a sequel that really evolves the material, The Mummy Returns mostly settles for giving you the original formula with more explosions and a slightly heavier headache. The script in The Mummy Returns has this funny habit of not really solving problems. It just throws something louder at them. A character is trapped. Don't worry, someone will arrive at the exact right second. The story needs to move to the next location. Convenient clue. The heroes need to understand some ancient rule. Suddenly somebody knows it. The villains need to catch up. They just do. And after a while, you stop feeling like the adventure is unfolding naturally. It starts feeling like the movie is dragging everyone from set piece to set piece, whether the logic is there or not. The first big warning sign is how often characters just appear where they need to be. Rick's house gets attacked, and suddenly familiar faces show up almost like they were waiting behind the camera for their cue. Ardith Bay Jonathan, whoever the scene requires, boom, there they are. It's not always terrible in the moment because the movie moves fast, but if you pause for even 2 seconds, you start asking, wait, how did they get here? Why now? Who told them? That is the kind of convenience this sequel depends on, and the film does it again and again. Someone is about to die and Rick appears. Someone is cornered and another hero jumps in. A villain seems to have the advantage, and suddenly the rules shift. It is classic adventure movie timing, sure, but here it gets used so much that it becomes predictable. The danger starts to feel less dangerous because you already know the rescue is coming on schedule. The screenplay also feels like it was written around the action scenes, not the other way around. You can almost imagine the process. Bus chase here, mummy attack there, airship sequence later, big desert finale at the end. Then the plot gets stretched between those moments like thin rope. It technically connects everything, but it doesn't always feel strong enough to hold the weight. And that is frustrating because the movie has enough energy to be great fun. The cast is game. The world is colorful. The basic idea of Rick and Evelyn racing to save their son while ancient forces wake up again is a solid adventure hook. But the writing keeps taking shortcuts. Instead of building suspense, it jumps to spectacle. Instead of developing character choices, it leans on coincidence. Instead of making the mythology feel clever, it uses ancient rules whenever the scene needs a new excuse. Now, I don't need a mummy movie to be completely realistic. Nobody is watching this expecting a documentary on archaeology, but even popcorn adventures need internal logic. They need the feeling that the heroes are surviving because of courage, intelligence, or luck that feels earned, not because the screenplay keeps opening emergency exits for them. That's the main weakness here. The Mummy Returns is constantly moving, but the story underneath is often held together by convenience. It can still be entertaining, absolutely, but there are moments where you're not swept away by the adventure. you're watching the script push pieces around the board and hoping you don't notice. The biggest issue with The Mummy Returns is not that it gives us more of the same. Honestly, more of the same can be great. Sometimes that is exactly what you want from a sequel. You like the first movie, you like the characters, you like the tone, you like the monsters, so naturally, you want another adventure in that same world. The problem is that The Mummy Returns does not always feel like it has a new idea. It feels like it has a bigger budget. That is different. The first film already had the ancient curse, the resurrected Imhotep, the desert adventure, the comic relief, the romance, the swarms of creepy things, and Brendan Fraser doing his whole charming action hero routine. So when the sequel comes along, it has to find a way to make that formula feel fresh again. And instead of really twisting the concept or finding a cleaner new direction, it mostly just piles more stuff on top. Now there is a kid. Now there is another ancient warrior. Now there is another army. Now there is more mythology. Now there are more flashbacks. Now everything is louder. And sure, some of it is entertaining. I would be lying if I said the movie has no energy. It absolutely does, but so much of that energy feels borrowed from the first film. You can almost feel the movie checking boxes. Bring back Imhotep, bring back the jokes, bring back the magical artifacts, bring back the sand, bring back the big final supernatural showdown. It is not lazy in terms of scale. The movie is working hard visually, but creatively, it often feels like it is running in circles. The Scorpion King should have been the fresh element. He is the big new mythological figure, the new threat, the thing that is supposed to separate this sequel from the original. But even there, the film does not fully commit to him as a character. He feels more like a concept, a name, a franchise seed, something added to make the sequel feel bigger rather than genuinely different. And that is where the lack of originality starts to hurt, because underneath all the monsters and action, the movie is basically saying, remember the first one. Here it is again, just with more noise. For some viewers, that is enough, and I get it. If you just want another goofy mummy adventure with Rick and Evelyn, the sequel delivers. But if you wanted the story to evolve, or the world to surprise you again, The Mummy Returns feels more like a remix than a real next chapter. Fun remix, sure, but still a remix. One thing that saves The Mummy Returns from completely collapsing under its own nonsense is that, thankfully, it seems to know it is nonsense. And I mean that as a compliment. This is not a movie standing there with a straight face, begging you to treat every ancient curse and magical bracelet like sacred mythology. It knows how ridiculous this world is. Rick knows it too. Half the time, Brendan Fraser plays him like a man who has already survived one impossible mummy disaster and is deeply annoyed that everyone is making him do it again. That self-awareness helps a lot, because the plot is insane. You've got resurrected priests, reincarnated lovers, a child wearing a cursed bracelet, an undead army, a scorpion king, ancient visions, secret temples, and villains casually trying to end the world like it's just another Tuesday. If the movie treated all of that with deadly seriousness, it would probably be unbearable. But it doesn't. It throws in jokes. It lets characters react with frustration, sarcasm, and disbelief. There are moments where the film almost feels like it is winking at the audience, saying, yeah, we know this is absurd, just go with it. And honestly, that is where the movie becomes easier to enjoy. The humor gives you permission to relax. You stop asking too many questions about the mythology and start enjoying the chaos as a big, goofy adventure ride. Now, does every joke work? No, some of the dialogue is cheesy, some of the comic relief feels forced. And sometimes the movie leans so hard into silliness that any real tension disappears. But the self-parody is still part of its charm. Rick especially makes this tone work. He is not some stiff chosen one hero delivering grand speeches every 5 minutes. He is tired, sarcastic, physical, and constantly reacting like, of course this is happening again. That attitude keeps the movie human, even when the story is drowning in CGI sandstorms and ancient death magic. So yes, The Mummy Returns is ridiculous, completely ridiculous at times, but the reason it remains watchable is because it rarely pretends otherwise. It understands that this is popcorn adventure, not high tragedy. It lets the audience laugh at the madness while still enjoying the spectacle. And for a sequel this loud, this messy, and this overstuffed, that little bit of self-awareness goes a long way. Let's talk about the tone of The Mummy Returns, because honestly, it's kind of all over the place, in the best way. This is a movie that wears its cheesiness like a badge of honor. From the over-the-top villains to the ridiculous curses and the never-ending action, it's pure Saturday matinee energy. There's something delightfully campy about it. The dialogue can be corny, the characters occasionally overreact, and yes, sometimes the one-liners hit you with that kind of exaggerated timing that makes you chuckle whether you want to or not. And that's part of the fun. It doesn't take itself seriously, not even close, and that gives you permission to just lean back and enjoy the ride. It's a movie that's aware of its own absurdity. You have Brendan Fraser running through tombs, Rachel Weisz tossing quips while facing ancient dangers, and a kid who somehow keeps the plot moving by doing things no 8-year-old should ever know how to do. The stakes are high, but the movie never pretends the stakes are actually realistic. You know, the kind of charm that keeps you watching even while rolling your eyes. And then there's the spectacle. The sandstorms, the flying airships, the swarms of pygmy mummies. It's loud, it's colorful, and it's ridiculous in all the right ways. Every set piece screams fun, and the movie leans into it. It's not subtle, it's not nuanced, but it is entertaining. It's the kind of film that reminds you why you loved those old adventure serials, back when heroes had improbable escapes, villains were larger than life, and the audience didn't mind a little exaggeration if it meant a good time. The Mummy Returns might be overstuffed and overblown, but it delivers that campy, cheesy, all-out fun that makes it a guilty pleasure, and sometimes that's exactly what you need on a weekend night. One thing you'll notice right away with The Mummy Returns is that the horror from the first movie has mostly taken a backseat. If you came in expecting the same creepy tension and genuinely scary moments that made the original Mummy crawl under your skin, you're in for a bit of a surprise. The mummies aren't as threatening here. The terror is dialed down because the movie is now more about non-stop action and spectacle than suspense. Instead of shadowy tombs, eerie silence, and moments that make you jump, we get hordes of CGI monsters, pyrotechnics, and high-speed chases. The fear factor is replaced with chaos, and honestly, that chaos is fun, but it's not frightening. Even Imhotep, who was terrifying in 1999, doesn't have the same edge. He's more of a larger-than-life villain than a menacing threat. And with the addition of the Scorpion King, who is flashy but more cartoonish than intimidating, the movie leans even further away from horror and closer to full-blown adventure fantasy. There are still moments that nod to the original creepiness, the mummies moving, the occasional dark chamber, but they're brief, almost throwaway. Everything is designed to keep the pace moving and the spectacle rolling. And that's fine if your goal is family-friendly excitement, but for anyone hoping to feel that sense of dread from the first film, it's definitely missing. So yeah, The Mummy Returns is a lot of things. Chaotic, fun, over the top, but scary. Not so much. The horror elements have been reduced, repackaged into grand set pieces, and largely traded for humor, action, and the kind of visual spectacle that keeps kids glued to the screen. It's adventure over atmosphere, pure and simple. If there's one thing you can't argue about in The Mummy Returns, it's that the movie never stops moving. I mean, it's relentless. From the opening London Museum sequence to the final desert showdown, there's almost no breathing room. Chases, fights, escapes, and traps hit you one after another like a non-stop roller coaster. You've got sword fights, gun battles, mummies swarming everywhere, dirigibles zooming across the sky, bus chases through 1930s London. The movie is basically a highlight reel of how many ways can we throw our heroes into peril. And honestly, that's part of the fun. It's exciting, high energy, and very easy to get swept up in if you're in the mood for a spectacle. But there's a flip side. The constant movement means there's almost no chance to really catch your breath or take in the environment. Some of the beautiful sets, the desert landscapes, the pyramids, even the incredible airship sequences, don't get time to shine because the camera is always pushing forward. You're watching action for action's sake, which can be thrilling, sure, but it also makes the movie feel a little exhausting at times. And the pacing isn't just fast, it's relentless. Every scene feels like it has to be bigger than the last, whether it's a magical army attacking, a quicksand trap, or Imhotep levitating people for no apparent reason. There's a certain rhythm to it, and Sommers clearly knows how to choreograph chaos, but sometimes it borders on overstimulation. You're watching, but you're also kind of dizzy from everything happening at once. Still, for what it is, a family-friendly adventure packed with over-the-top stunts and imaginative set pieces, the non-stop action works. It's entertaining, even if it's a little too much. You don't come to this movie for quiet suspense or character moments. You come to see how far these characters can be pushed, and trust me, the film delivers on that front in spades. In short, the action, chases, and constant movement are exhausting, ridiculous, and thrilling all at once. It's messy adrenaline, but it's exactly what the audience tuning in for a high-octane adventure expects. All right, let's talk about pacing, because this is where The Mummy Returns really shows its personality and maybe its biggest flaw. From start to finish, this movie doesn't let up. Every scene is driving forward, and that keeps you on your toes, no doubt about it. You're constantly moving from one danger to the next, one chase to another, one mummy attack to the next magical artifact disaster. The problem is there's just so much. It's overstuffed. I mean, you barely have a moment to process what just happened before the movie is tossing another threat, another villain, or another flashback at you. Reincarnation sequences, the Scorpion King's backstory, multiple armies, the kid in danger beats, giant sandstorms, it's relentless. And while it's exciting, it's also a little overwhelming. The pacing works if you're looking for non-stop adventure. It never drags, you won't catch yourself yawning or staring at the clock. But the sheer volume of stuff the film crams in means it's hard to connect with anything emotionally. You don't get much time to care deeply about the stakes, because as soon as one problem resolves, 10 more are waiting. Even the comedy and character moments feel squeezed in between explosions. Brendan Fraser is charming as always, Rachel Weisz is tough and engaging, but the script doesn't give you much space to breathe with them. And the kid, he's adorable, but again, there's just too much going on around him for those family moments to land as well as they could. So yeah, the pacing is a double-edged sword, fast, frenetic, and thrilling on one side, overstuffed, a little exhausting, and sometimes emotionally shallow on the other. But if you came for a big, noisy, adventure-packed ride, which, let's be honest, is exactly what this movie is aiming for, you'll probably enjoy every minute, even if your brain needs a breather afterward. If there's one thing you can't miss about The Mummy Returns, it's how much it's all about the spectacle. The movie is basically a non-stop parade of explosions, CGI creatures, sandstorms, airships, and magical mayhem. It looks big. It sounds huge, it feels enormous. And honestly, it's hard not to admire how ambitious it is. But here's the catch. The story doesn't always keep up. The characters, the plot, the stakes, they all get pushed aside for the next big visual moment. It's style over substance in the purest sense. You're dazzled by the sets, the costumes, the pyrotechnics, the endless chases, and you kind of forget to ask, wait, why is this happening? Or does it make sense? Even the villains suffer from this. Imhotep, the Scorpion King, all these magical threats, they're impressive to look at, but we don't really get to understand them or fear them the way we might in a movie with a tighter script. The danger is huge, the stakes are world-ending, but the emotional core is thin. You're watching a roller coaster of visuals, not a story you feel invested in. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. If your goal is mindless, over-the-top adventure, this movie hits the mark. You get chaos, humor, and non-stop spectacle. It's fun, it's flashy, it's loud. It's everything you'd expect from a big summer blockbuster sequel. But if you're hoping for the storytelling depth, character tension, or subtle thrills of the first movie, you're going to feel a little shortchanged. The style is exciting, sure, but the substance, the real heart of the story, is often buried under layers of CGI and set-piece mania. In short, The Mummy Returns looks and sounds amazing, but you're not watching it for the plot. You're watching it for the ride, the chaos, the sand, the monsters, and the sheer audacity of it all. And sometimes that's exactly what makes it entertaining, even if it doesn't make it particularly smart. There's a weird thing that happens in The Mummy Returns, and it sounds wrong until you actually watch the movie again. There is so much action that some of it starts to feel boring. I know that sounds backwards. How can a movie with sword fights, mummies, bus chases, airships, explosions, ancient armies, and giant supernatural threats feel boring? But that's the problem. When everything is turned up all the time, nothing really stands out after a while. The movie barely gives you a second to settle into a scene. Someone is running, someone is fighting, something is collapsing, some creature is attacking, and before that moment can actually build tension, we're already moving to the next one. It's constant motion, but constant motion is not the same as excitement. Excitement needs contrast. You need a little quiet before the danger. You need a moment where the characters breathe, where the audience gets nervous, where you feel the threat coming. The Mummy Returns often skips that part. It just throws the threat directly at you and expects the size of the set piece to do all the work. And sometimes it does work. The movie has fun action. I'm not pretending it doesn't. But after the third or fourth massive sequence, you start to feel a little numb. The film is trying so hard to entertain you that it almost forgets to let you care. That's why the first movie feels cleaner in comparison. It had action, sure, but it also had build-up. It had atmosphere. It had moments where Imhotep felt dangerous before the chaos started. Here, the sequel is in such a rush to keep the ride moving that the action can start feeling like noise. And that's the strange lesson of this movie. More action does not automatically mean more fun. More explosions do not automatically mean higher stakes. If the characters and story are just being dragged from one effect sequence to another, the audience can eventually detach. So yes, The Mummy Returns is never slow, but somehow at times it still manages to be tiring. Not because nothing is happening, because too much is happening, and not enough of it has room to matter. For all the criticism you can throw at The Mummy Returns, one thing is pretty obvious. This movie wants to look huge, and a lot of the time it does. The production design is doing some serious heavy lifting here. You've got the British Museum, ancient tombs, desert ruins, temples, pyramids, airships, hidden chambers, the whole adventure movie buffet. It has that big, glossy, early 2000s blockbuster look where every location feels like it was designed to make you go, okay, yeah, this is expensive. And honestly, some of it is gorgeous. The London material gives the movie a nice period adventure flavor. The museum scenes have that dark, mysterious energy, like every corner has some cursed object waiting to ruin someone's life. Then once the story moves into the desert, the film really opens up. The sand, the ruins, the wide landscapes, it gives everything that old-fashioned expedition feel, even when the plot itself is running on pure nonsense. The airship is probably one of the coolest visual touches. It has this strange floating gondola quality, drifting through mountains and desert scenery like something out of a pulp adventure painting. It's ridiculous, sure, but in the right way. That's exactly the kind of image a movie like this should have. And the sets are packed with detail. You can feel the attempt to make the world bigger than the first film. More rooms, more relics, more carvings, more dramatic entrances, more ancient danger waiting behind giant stone doors. Even when the story gets messy, the environments keep selling the adventure. Now, the visual effects are a different conversation, and not always a kind one. But in terms of scale, art direction, and pure spectacle, The Mummy Returns absolutely delivers. It gives you a world that feels busy, colorful, exaggerated, and alive with danger. Maybe the movie doesn't always give the audience enough time to enjoy those visuals properly, because it is constantly sprinting into the next chase. But when you pause and actually look at the design of the thing, there's real imagination there. It may not be subtle, it may not be tasteful in every moment, but it has size, it has texture, it has that grand adventure feeling. And for a sequel this loud and chaotic, that visual ambition is one of the reasons it still sticks in people's memories. The CGI in The Mummy Returns is a strange little time capsule, because sometimes, honestly, it works. There are moments where the movie has that big early 2000s effects confidence, swarms of creatures, supernatural armies, sand moving like it has a mind of its own, giant adventure images that feel designed for a packed theater. You can see the ambition. The film wants every scene to feel bigger than the last, and at its best, the digital effects help create that wild, pulpy, anything-can-happen energy. But then there are other moments, and those moments are rough. The problem is not just that the CGI has aged. Lots of movies from that era have dated effects. The bigger issue is that The Mummy Returns depends on them so heavily that when they fail, the whole scene starts to wobble. Instead of feeling dangerous, some creatures look rubbery. Instead of feeling epic, some action beats feel weightless. You're supposed to be watching ancient evil come alive, but sometimes it looks more like a video game cutscene that needed another 6 months of work. That is why the film can be visually exciting one minute and completely unconvincing the next. A mummy swarm can be fun. A supernatural chase can have energy. Some of the creature ideas are genuinely cool. But because everything is moving so fast, and the movie keeps throwing more digital spectacle at you, the weaker effects become harder to ignore, and it creates this weird tension. You admire the imagination, but you don't always believe the image. The first film had CGI too, obviously, but it felt a little more controlled. Here, the sequel goes bigger, louder, and more effects-heavy, and that makes the cracks much more visible. It's like the movie is saying, look how much we can show you, while your brain is quietly responding, yeah, but should you? Still, I don't want to pretend every effect is terrible. Some of it has charm. Some of it gives the movie exactly the kind of exaggerated adventure flavor it needs. But the bad effects are bad enough that they become part of the movie's identity. So the CGI in The Mummy Returns is basically the film in miniature. Ambitious, energetic, messy, sometimes impressive, sometimes embarrassing, and always trying very, very hard to entertain you. And then we get to the Scorpion King. Yeah, that Scorpion King. You can talk about The Mummy Returns for an hour, the story, the pacing, the action, the cast, but eventually everybody ends up in the same place, that final CGI creature. And the problem is the whole movie spends so much time building him up. He is not treated like a random monster. He is supposed to be this legendary warrior, this ancient, unstoppable force, the guy even Imhotep is worried about. So when he finally appears, you expect something huge, something terrifying, something that makes the climax feel dangerous. And then the effect shows up. It is rough. There is no gentle way to put it. The body looks artificial. The face does not quite sit right. The movement feels weightless. And Dwayne Johnson's digital expression has that strange frozen video game quality where you can tell what they were trying to do, but the technology just was not there yet. The worst part is that it kills the tension. This should be the moment where the movie reaches its biggest mythological payoff. The Scorpion King should feel like the ultimate threat after all that setup with Anubis, the army, the bracelet, the visions, everything. Instead, you're pulled out of the movie at the exact moment you should be most locked in. And look, bad CGI ages. That happens. But this one became famous because it was not a tiny background effect. It was the centerpiece of the finale. The movie basically says, here is the big boss battle, and then gives us something that looks unfinished. What makes it even more frustrating is that the idea is cool. A cursed warrior merged with a scorpion body, guarding the power of Anubis, waiting at the end of this massive desert adventure. That should be amazing. In another version of the movie, maybe with a more practical design or more polished effects, it could have been genuinely memorable for the right reasons. Instead, it is memorable for the wrong reasons, and honestly, it becomes kind of funny. Not scary, not intimidating, funny. You start watching the climax less as a life-or-death battle and more as a weird early 2000s CGI artifact. Like, oh wow, they really put that on the screen. That is the Scorpion King problem in a nutshell. The film builds a myth, then the visual effect undercuts it. It wants awe, but gets laughter. It wants danger, but gets distraction. And for a movie already fighting accusations of being too loud, too digital, and too obsessed with spectacle, that finale does not exactly help its case. Okay, so if The Scorpion King wasn't enough to make you question the CGI, The Mummy Returns has plenty of other moments where the digital effects really don't hold up. And I mean, it's kind of fascinating how a movie can swing between wow and ouch in the same frame. Take the forest scene in the middle of the desert. You're watching a lush, green forest appear out of nowhere, being sucked into a pyramid like some kind of magical vacuum. On paper, it's insane and imaginative. On screen, well, it looks like a rushed Photoshop animation someone threw together in an afternoon. You want it to feel epic. Instead, you just blink and think, wait, that's supposed to be real. Then there's the airship escape. It's meant to be a high-stakes, edge-of-your-seat moment. The visuals should sell danger, speed, and tension. Instead, parts of it feel weightless, like the airship is floating in some cartoon sky rather than racing over perilous terrain. And don't get me started on the pygmy mummies and other creatures. Some of them are incredible, like the little critters swarming the streets, but others are awkward, stiff, and completely artificial. You can tell when the camera is close that it's all digital, and it pulls you out of the moment just when the filmmakers want you invested in the danger. Even the water and sand effects sometimes collapse under scrutiny. Tsunamis, sandstorms, magical blasts, they all have ambition, sure, but the execution doesn't always sell the weight or realism. You're supposed to feel fear or awe, but sometimes it's more like, oh, that's a flat texture flying across the screen. And that's the weird thing. The movie tries so hard to be massive and overwhelming with its visuals that when the CGI fails, it fails big. It's not just a small glitch. It's front and center, right in the climax or during a key action set piece, and it reminds you that no matter how many monsters or effects you throw at a scene, the audience still notices when it looks off. So yeah, The Scorpion King isn't the only offender. There are moments all over the movie, forests, creatures, blasts, airships, where the CGI doesn't hold up. It's inconsistent, distracting, and sometimes unintentionally hilarious. But at the same time, you can't help admiring the ambition. They wanted spectacle, they just didn't always land it. There's a point while watching The Mummy Returns where you start missing rubber suits. And I know that sounds strange, because this is a big early 2000s blockbuster. The whole selling point is scale. CGI armies, digital monsters, sand faces, supernatural chaos, all of that was supposed to feel like the future of adventure movies. Bigger, faster, more impossible. But sometimes, while the movie is throwing another computer-generated creature at the screen, you catch yourself thinking, maybe the old ways had something. A guy in a monster suit might look fake, sure. Stop motion can look jerky. Practical puppets can be stiff, but at least they're there. They have weight, they take up space. The actors can react to something. The camera can find texture. There's a weird physical honesty to practical effects, even when they're not perfect. With The Mummy Returns, a lot of the CGI has the opposite problem. It can move faster, it can do more, it can fill the screen with things no practical effect could easily manage, but it often feels weightless. The danger doesn't always feel like it's sharing the room with the characters. It feels pasted in later, and that hurts a movie like this because monsters need presence. A mummy, a scorpion creature, a swarm of little undead attackers, they don't have to look completely realistic, but they do need to feel touchable in some way. They need dirt, shadow, awkward movement, something that makes your brain accept them as part of the world. That's probably why older monster effects still hold a certain charm. Even when you can see the seams, there's craft in them. There's personality. You can feel the hands of the artists behind the thing. Here, the digital work is ambitious, no doubt, but ambition is not the same as believability. And when the CGI fails, you don't admire the creature, you notice the software. So yeah, The Mummy Returns makes you appreciate the lost art of practical monsters a little more. Not because practical effects are always better, but because sometimes a clunky physical creature with real texture can be more convincing than a huge digital beast that never quite feels alive. One of the unsung heroes of The Mummy Returns is the soundtrack, and the way the sound design really sells the movie, especially if you're watching it at home on a proper system. Alan Silvestri takes over from Jerry Goldsmith, and while I personally prefer Goldsmith's original flavor, Silvestri does a solid job here. The music has that big, epic sweep that matches the non-stop action, and it's got moments that actually make you feel like you're in the middle of an adventure. Then there's the sound itself. The surround channels are firing constantly, sandstorms roar, explosions crackle, monsters shriek, and the ambient desert wind makes you feel like you're there with the O'Connells. If you've got a high-end home theater, these sequences are pure joy. You lean forward in your seat, your living room becomes a mini IMAX, and for a few minutes, you're in the middle of this chaotic adventure world. The sound mixing also helps with the pacing. Even when the story is overstuffed and the plot gets messy, the audio keeps you invested. Action beats feel punchy, magical effects feel larger than life, and the suspense, fleeting as it may be, is supported by the score. There's a rhythm to the chaos, and a lot of that rhythm comes from how the sound is layered. Of course, it's not perfect. Some of the dialogue gets buried under all the explosions and creature noises, which can make it hard to follow exactly what's happening. And the music sometimes veers a little too epic trailer for its own good, reminding you that yes, this is a blockbuster designed to look and sound huge. But here's the thing, it works. Even when the plot is messy or the CGI is questionable, the audio keeps you hooked. It elevates the spectacle. It makes the set pieces feel immersive. And if you're watching at home, it's one of those movies that really benefits from a good system because it's like the sound itself is part of the adventure. So yes, the music and sound design aren't subtle, but they know what this movie is, an over-the-top, non-stop ride, and they sell it beautifully. They give it life, energy, and a punch that keeps you coming back to the chaos again and again. Now let's talk dialogue, because The Mummy Returns has a bit of a love-hate relationship with words. On one hand, there are some zippy one-liners and moments of humor that land, usually thanks to Brendan Fraser's charm or John Hannah's comic timing. Those little cracks in the chaos give you a breather between explosions, sandstorms, and CGI monsters. On the other hand, sometimes the dialogue is just plain awkward. You get modern phrases that feel completely out of place for a film set in the 1930s. Lines like, "Are we there yet?" or "Get a room," pop up and immediately yank you out of the period setting. It's small stuff, but it adds up, and for anyone who's paying attention, it's a little jarring. Then there's the issue of exposition. The script often uses dialogue to explain the plot or magical rules, which is fine, except it sometimes comes off as clunky or forced. You'll get characters reciting ancient curses or explaining visions like they're giving a lecture instead of experiencing danger. And with so much else going on, chases, monster swarms, magical armies, these moments can feel like speed bumps in the middle of a race. Some of it is funny, sure, especially if you lean into the movie's self-parody vibe. But there are stretches where the dialogue is just there to get the plot moving or remind you what artifact does what, and it doesn't feel natural. Fraser and Weiss do their best, but even their charisma can't completely rescue lines that sound like they belong in a modern action flick rather than a 1930s adventure. So, in short, the dialogue is a mix of highs and lows. Some of it sparks humor, some of it keeps the story moving, and some of it makes you scratch your head. And the period inaccuracies. They're minor, but they keep reminding you that the movie is more about fun spectacle than historical fidelity. It's flashy, it's cheesy, and it's not always in character with the time period, but if you accept that, it's still an entertaining ride. The accents in The Mummy Returns are one of those things you may not notice immediately because the movie is moving so fast. There's always a chase, a curse, a monster, or somebody shouting about an ancient army. But once you do notice it, yeah, it's hard to unhear. The film is set in this big international adventure world: London, Egypt, ancient history, British museums, desert warriors, resurrected priests, so naturally, you're going to have a mix of voices. That part makes sense. The problem is that the accents don't always feel like they belong to the same movie. Some characters sound polished and theatrical, some sound exaggerated, some drift in and out of whatever they're supposed to be doing. And then you get moments where a line is already a little cheesy, and the accent makes it feel even more artificial. Not terrible in a movie-breaking way, but distracting. Like the film briefly reminds you, oh right, these are actors performing a very heightened version of this world. And to be fair, The Mummy Returns is not exactly aiming for documentary realism. This is a movie with magical bracelets, undead armies, and a giant scorpion warrior. So no, I'm not sitting there demanding perfect linguistic accuracy while Brendan Fraser is fighting mummies on a bus. But accents still matter because they help sell the atmosphere. They help make the 1930s adventure setting feel lived in. When they feel inconsistent, the world starts to feel a little more like a studio backlot, a little more like costumes and sets and people doing adventure movie voices. It's not the biggest flaw in the film. Not even close. The CGI has much louder problems. The plot is way messier. But the accent issue adds to that general feeling of unevenness. The movie has charm, but it also has rough edges everywhere. And honestly, that's kind of the whole experience of The Mummy Returns. Even the small details feel over the top, slightly mismatched, and not always carefully controlled. Sometimes that gives the movie personality. Other times, it just makes you wish someone had slowed down long enough to smooth things out. Let's start with Rick O'Connell, because honestly, this is where The Mummy Returns still has some of its heart. Brendan Fraser steps back into the role, and even though the movie around him is chaotic, he still carries that charm and energy that made the first film so watchable. Rick is exactly what you want in this kind of adventure hero. Resourceful, a little cocky, physically capable, and funny without trying too hard. Fraser doesn't overthink it. He's not brooding or melodramatic. He's just genuinely invested in getting through the ridiculous situations the movie throws at him, from chasing undead armies to rescuing his son, Alex, to surviving collapsing temples and flying airships. And somehow he still makes it feel fun. Now, he's a little more whipped than in the first movie, married, fatherly, constantly reacting to Evelyn's plans and Alex's antics, but that adds a layer of relatability. He's not perfect. He's a guy out of his depth half the time, and that makes his triumphs feel earned, even in the middle of all the over-the-top chaos. And the chemistry between Fraser and Rachel Weisz still works. They bounce off each other naturally. He's the brawn, she's the brains, and together they make the family dynamic feel believable, even if the rest of the movie is a whirlwind of CGI and set pieces. Their interactions, little jokes, and reactions to absurd situations keep the movie grounded, which is essential when everything else is so over the top. Sure, Fraser's acting isn't revolutionary. He's working within the limits of the script, which, let's be honest, gives him plenty of convenience-based rescues and nonsensical plot points. But he does enough with charm, timing, and physicality to make Rick O'Connell the center of gravity that the film needs. He's the character you can root for, even when the world is being flattened by magical armies and exploding tombs. Bottom line, Brendan Fraser as Rick O'Connell remains one of the most enjoyable things in The Mummy Returns. He's likable, capable, funny, and the kind of hero you don't mind being tossed from one over-the-top adventure to the next. Even when the movie gets messy, he's steady. He's the glue holding this chaotic sequel together. Evelyn is one of the more interesting parts of The Mummy Returns because the sequel clearly wants to push her beyond what she was in the first film. In the original, she had that nervous, bookish charm. She was clever, passionate, awkward in a really likable way, and she brought this academic excitement to the adventure. Rachel Weisz made her feel warm and funny without turning her into a joke. She was not just the love interest. She had personality. Here, though, the movie gives her an action upgrade. Suddenly, Evelyn is not just reading ancient texts and figuring out clues. She is fighting, swinging weapons, having visions, remembering a past life, and stepping into this whole reincarnation storyline with Princess Nefertiti. And depending on how you look at it, that is either a cool evolution or a little bit too convenient. On the positive side, Weisz handles the physical side surprisingly well. She has grace, she has energy, and she makes Evelyn feel more confident without completely losing the character's intelligence. You can believe this version of Evelyn has grown after the first movie. She has been through impossible danger before. She is now a mother, and she is not going to stand around waiting for Rick to save everyone. That part works, but the reincarnation twist is where it gets messy. It gives Evelyn more importance in the mythology, sure, but it also feels like the sequel suddenly decided, okay, she needs a bigger magical connection now. It is not impossible to accept, but it does feel like one of those sequel choices that exists because everything has to be bigger this time. Bigger villain, bigger army, bigger backstory, bigger destiny. Still, Rachel Weisz keeps the character watchable. Even when the writing gets shaky, she brings enough charm and presence to hold it together. Her scenes with Brendan Fraser still have that easy chemistry, and her duel with Patricia Velasquez gives the movie one of its more memorable physical moments. So Evelyn's role in The Mummy Returns is a bit of a mixed bag. The movie makes her stronger, more active, and more central, which is great, but it also wraps her in a mythology twist that feels slightly forced. Weisz makes it work better than it probably should. That is the real takeaway. Even when the script is busy turning Evelyn into an action heroine with a secret ancient past, Rachel Weisz still finds the human charm underneath. One of the reasons The Mummy Returns still works, even when the story is throwing too much at the screen, is Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz together. Their chemistry is still there. Actually, it might be one of the most reliable things in the whole movie. Rick and Evelyn don't feel like two characters who were randomly pushed into a sequel because the first film made money. They feel like a couple, a slightly chaotic couple, sure, but a believable one. There's teasing, arguing, panic, affection, and that very specific energy of two people who have already survived one ancient curse and are now somehow doing it again with a child involved. And that changes the dynamic in a nice way. In the first film, there was more of that romantic adventure spark, the tough guy and the bookish Egyptologist slowly falling for each other, while everything around them turned into mummy-flavored disaster. Here they're married, they have history, they trust each other. The flirting is still there, but now it feels more lived in, more relaxed, like they've already done the dramatic romance part and now they're in the please stop touching cursed objects, our son is watching phase. Fraser brings that loose, sarcastic, physical charm. Weisz brings intelligence, warmth, and a sharper confidence this time. Together, they balance each other really well. He makes the danger feel fun. She makes the mythology feel slightly more grounded. And when the movie gets too loud, their little reactions to each other help bring it back down to something human. That's important because The Mummy Returns can easily become just noise, CGI creatures, magical armies, airships, explosions, all of it. But when Rick and Evelyn are on screen together, the movie has a center. You remember there are people inside all this spectacle, not just action figures being dragged from one set piece to another. Even the family angle works better because of them. You believe they care about Alex. You believe they would tear through half of Egypt to get him back. The emotional stakes are not especially deep, but Fraser and Weisz sell them with enough charm that you go along with it. Honestly, without that chemistry, the sequel would feel much emptier. The plot is messy, the CGI is uneven, the villains are a mixed bag, but Rick and Evelyn, they still click. And sometimes in a movie this overstuffed, that kind of simple screen chemistry does more heavy lifting than any magical bracelet or ancient prophecy ever could. One of the surprising things about The Mummy Returns is how much it leans into family, and I mean that in the best possible way. Amid all the chaos, the mummies, the sandstorms, the CGI armies, the Scorpion King, the real emotional anchor of the movie is the O'Connell family. Brendan Fraser as Rick, Rachel Weisz as Evelyn, and young Freddie both as Alex form a trio that actually gives you a reason to care. The movie is overstuffed with plot threads and supernatural threats, but when it comes back to the family, it hits a heartbeat that grounds all the spectacle. You see them bickering, joking, panicking, strategizing, and it's oddly relatable. It reminds you that no matter how ridiculous the situation, these are people trying to protect each other. Alex's presence adds stakes in a way that the first movie didn't need. Suddenly, it's not just about stopping Imhotep or the Scorpion King. It's about keeping your kid alive while facing armies of the undead. That tension makes the big, crazy moments matter a little more, even if the movie is busy throwing everything else at you. And it's fun to see Fraser and Weisz playing parents who aren't perfect. Rick gets exasperated. Evelyn gets frustrated. Alex has his moments of brilliance and trouble, which feel like a real kid in the middle of absurd adventures. It's chaotic, sure, but it's human chaos, and that actually makes the movie more engaging. Even John Hannah as the brother-in-law adds to this dynamic. He's the comic relief, the lovable idiot, the guy who's just along for the ride, and his presence reinforces the sense of family. It's not deep drama, but the relationships keep the audience invested even when the plot is spinning out of control. So while the action, CGI, and mythology grab your attention, it's the family dynamic that keeps you emotionally connected. The O'Connells are the glue holding all this chaos together. They make you care, they make you laugh, and they make the wild ride just a little more meaningful. In the end, for all the spectacle and absurdity, it's the family moments, the love, the humor, the protective instincts that serve as the emotional core of The Mummy Returns. And without that, the movie would probably just feel like a noisy, CGI-heavy mess. Now, we have to talk about Alex, the O'Connell's 8-year-old son, and honestly, he's a bit of a double-edged sword in The Mummy Returns. On one hand, Freddie Both does a fine job. He's charming, cheeky, and manages to hold his own in a movie that's otherwise completely dominated by adults, CGI, and chaos. He adds energy, he gives the family moments some stakes, and you do feel, at least a little, the pressure of what's happening, the bracelet of Anubis, the kidnappings, the magical visions. It makes the adventure more than just adults running around ancient ruins. But here's the catch. Some of the time, he's just too perfect, too smart, too conveniently helpful. He knows exactly what to do with the bracelet. He interprets visions better than anyone else, and the movie leans on him as a plot device more than a real kid. At times, it's like, okay, sure, this 8-year-old is now an expert archaeologist and the key to saving the world because why not? That's where he becomes divisive. For some viewers, Alex is adorable, funny, and adds a family-friendly layer to the chaos. For others, he's annoying, unbelievable, and a little plot shortcut that undercuts tension. He's meant to be the heart of the family dynamic, but sometimes he ends up feeling like a convenient cheat code the writers inserted to keep the story moving. And let's be honest. In a movie that's already overstuffed, 3 villains, armies, curses, and nonstop action, a kid who never really seems in danger can make the stakes feel less real. You're supposed to be worried for him, but because he's almost always ahead of the plot, that worry never fully lands. Still, I'll give the kid credit. He's energetic, he has screen presence, and he adds moments of levity to offset the chaos. He's cute, he's funny, and in the right mood, he actually makes the movie more fun to watch. But if you're looking for realism or a believable child character, he's going to drive you a little nuts. So Alex is a mixed bag. He's essential to the family dynamic and some of the emotional beats, but he's also one of those characters who can make you roll your eyes, a kid who's simultaneously adorable and ridiculously convenient. And that's part of why The Mummy Returns is such a love-it-or-hate-it experience. All right, let's dive a little deeper into Alex. And yes, this is where the suspension of disbelief really gets tested. Because let's be honest, this kid is a genius, maybe a little too genius. He puts on the bracelet of Anubis and suddenly has visions, deciphers ancient clues, and basically knows more about archaeology than half the experts in the British Museum. I mean, come on, he's eight, and somehow he's solving mysteries that have stumped seasoned adults. It's convenient, sure. The movie leans heavily on him to move the plot along. Without Alex, the heroes would be wandering around aimlessly, and the story might stall. But the problem is that it makes the stakes feel a little artificial. You're supposed to be worried about the kid, yet he's always one step ahead, always figuring things out faster than anyone else. It's hard to feel real tension when the vulnerable child is practically a mini Indiana Jones. At the same time, though, the idea works for a family adventure. He's clever, curious, and funny, and his intelligence gives the movie some charm. The kid moments provide levity amid all the chaos, and if you let yourself enjoy it, it's actually kind of fun to see him outsmart mummies, curses, and villains. But if you're looking for realism, it's a stretch. The child genius trope is played to the extreme here, and sometimes it feels like the writers just needed someone to magically carry the plot forward. That's why Alex is divisive. Some viewers will adore him for the energy and humor, others will roll their eyes at how implausible he is. In short, Alex is both a delight and a cheat code. He's the family's spark, the catalyst for adventure, and yes, occasionally a little unbelievable. But honestly, in a movie this over the top, maybe that's exactly what it needs, someone to keep the story moving while we enjoy the chaos around him. Let's talk about Jonathan, played by John Hannah. And well, he's not really the Jonathan we loved from the first film. In the original Mummy, he had charm, a few sharp one-liners, and that perfect mix of comic relief and opportunistic schemer. You never quite knew what he was going to do next, and that made him fun. Here, he's mostly just there. John Hannah still has the timing, and he still brings a little personality to the role, but the script doesn't give him much to work with. He pops up in scenes because he's part of the family adventure, but his purpose feels reduced. The clever quips, the little schemes, the unpredictability, that's all dialed back. Most of the time, he's just reacting to the chaos around him. It's not Hannah's fault. He's clearly trying, but the sequel's obsession with non-stop action and spectacle pushes characters like Jonathan to the side. He's less a contributing hero and more a familiar face, a reminder that he exists, while Rick, Evelyn, Alex, and the CGI armies get all the attention. That said, the occasional one-liner still lands. Every now and then you see glimpses of the Jonathan we remember, a raised eyebrow, a sarcastic comment, a funny grimace, but those moments are fleeting. They remind you how much the character could have added if the script had made space for him. In short, John Hannah's Jonathan is underused here. He's still likable, he's still funny in spots, but compared to the first movie, his role feels smaller, more ornamental, and sometimes almost irrelevant. For fans of the first film, it's a little disappointing. He had so much personality, and here it's mostly on standby while the big effects and plot machinery take center stage. Ardith Bay is one of those characters who walks into The Mummy Returns with instant cool points already loaded. Oded Fehr has that presence. He doesn't need to do much. Put him in the Desert Warrior costume, give him a serious warning about ancient evil, let him stare into the distance like he knows the world is about to end, and somehow it works. He brings a calm intensity that the movie really needs, especially when everything else is exploding, screaming, or running from CGI creatures. But here's the problem. The film doesn't really give Ardith much of an arc. He's important to the story, sure. He shows up, explains danger, helps the heroes, leads his people, fights when needed, and keeps reminding everyone that the stakes are massive. But emotionally, there isn't a lot for him to do. He mostly functions as the serious mythological guide, the guy who understands the ancient threat while Rick is busy reacting like, great, another undead army. And honestly, that is a little disappointing because Oded Fehr is good in the role. He has charisma, he has authority, he makes Ardith feel like someone with a whole life and history outside the frame. You believe he belongs to this world. You believe he has seen terrible things. You believe he would actually stand between humanity and some ancient curse without making a big speech about it. The sequel just treats him more like a useful piece of franchise machinery. Need a warning, Ardith appears. Need desert warriors, Ardith brings them. Need someone to explain the scale of the threat, Ardith is there. That does not make him bad, far from it. He remains one of the more enjoyable supporting characters. But compared with how much noise the film gives to the Scorpion King, Alex's bracelet, Imhotep's return, and Evelyn's reincarnation storyline, Ardith feels slightly pushed to the side. Still, every time Oded Fehr is on screen, the movie gains a little weight. He gives the adventure some seriousness without draining the fun out of it, and in a sequel this crowded, that is valuable. So Ardith Bey may not get the strongest material in The Mummy Returns, but he absolutely adds flavor. He is not the emotional center, and he is not the comic relief. He is the steady mythic presence, the one character who seems to understand just how badly everyone has messed up by waking the dead again. Imhotep is back again, and honestly, Arnold Vosloo still gives him more presence than the script probably deserves. In the first Mummy, Imhotep had this genuinely eerie quality. He wasn't just another villain chasing power. He felt ancient, cursed, tragic, and dangerous. There was something unsettling about him, the way he moved, the way he looked at people, the way his whole existence felt tied to death, obsession, and punishment. In The Mummy Returns, some of that edge is still there, but it's definitely softened. Vosloo still knows how to play him. He has that cold stare, that quiet intensity, that sense of someone who believes completely in his own destiny. Even when the movie around him becomes louder and more cartoonish, he gives Imhotep a certain elegance. He doesn't need to shout every line. He just has to stand there looking like a cursed priest who has waited 3,000 years and is already tired of everyone's incompetence. The issue is that the sequel doesn't make him as scary. Part of that is because the movie is simply busier. Imhotep is no longer the one terrifying supernatural force at the center of everything. Now he has to share space with the Scorpion King, the bracelet of Anubis, the army of Anubis, Evelyn's past life visions, Alex's kidnapping, and about 10 different action sequences happening around him. He's still important, but he doesn't dominate the movie the way he did before. And when a villain loses that focus, he loses some of his power. The film also makes him feel more like an action fantasy villain than a horror figure. In the original, his menace came from decay, curses, plagues, and this feeling that something dead had returned to the world unnaturally. Here, he's more involved in big magical battles and world-conquering schemes. It's entertaining, sure, but it's not quite as creepy. Still, Vosloo keeps him watchable. There's a sadness underneath Imhotep, especially in his connection to Ankh-Sunamun. He's monstrous, obviously, but he's driven by love, obsession, and betrayal as much as power. That gives him more flavor than the average blockbuster villain. So while Imhotep is not as frightening or memorable here as he was in the first film, Arnold Vosloo remains one of the sequel's stronger pieces. He brings dignity to a movie that is often busy being ridiculous, and even when the story reduces him to just another player in the chaos, he still carries the weight of the character. Imhotep's powers in The Mummy Returns are one of those things where, after a while, you just stop asking questions, because in the first movie, there was at least a stronger idea behind what he could do. His powers felt connected to ancient curses, plagues, decay, resurrection, all that eerie biblical disaster stuff. It gave him a kind of mythic horror identity. He wasn't just magic guy. He felt like a dead priest dragging the old punishments of Egypt back into the modern world. Here, though, the rules get a little blurry. Suddenly, Imhotep can do whatever the scene needs him to do. He can throw people around without touching them. He can summon strange supernatural forces. He can create massive water effects with his face in them. He can move in ways that feel less like an ancient mummy and more like a deleted villain from an early superhero movie. And look, I'm not saying I need a full rulebook. This is The Mummy Returns, not a magic system lecture, but some consistency helps. When a villain's powers feel random, the tension gets weaker because you're never really sure what he can or cannot do. Even worse, you start asking questions the movie does not want you to ask. If Imhotep can levitate people, why does he only use it sometimes? If he has this much control over the environment, why does he keep letting the heroes escape? If he can pull off these huge magical tricks, why does he suddenly struggle when the plot needs him to struggle? That is where the writing starts showing. His abilities are not always built around character or mythology. They are built around set pieces. The movie wants a cool visual, so Imhotep gets a new trick for a minute. Evelyn gets more action hero styling this time, while still keeping a bit of that elegant period feel. Ardith Bey looks instantly iconic in his Desert Warrior gear. Anck-Su-Namun's design is theatrical, seductive, and dangerous in exactly the way this kind of movie wants. Even when the characters are not deeply written, their visual presentation gives them personality. But here's the criticism. The movie doesn't always let these elements breathe. There are some genuinely handsome images in The Mummy Returns, but the film is in such a rush that it often charges straight past them. A beautiful set appears, and before you can appreciate the detail, somebody is running, fighting, screaming, or being attacked by a digital creature. The locations become backgrounds for chaos instead of places with atmosphere. That is the frustrating part. The movie has the ingredients for a richer adventure experience: strong costumes, dramatic locations, big production value, a real sense of scale. But because it is so obsessed with constant movement and effects, those elements sometimes get buried. Still, I do think the craftsmanship deserves credit. Even if the CGI is uneven, the physical world of the movie has texture. The costumes, sets, and locations help sell the fantasy far better than some of the digital effects do. So yes, The Mummy Returns may be messy, loud, and overstuffed, but it is not visually lazy. There is real effort in the look of the film. I just wish the movie slowed down now and then to let us actually enjoy it. The London opening is honestly one of the better parts of The Mummy Returns, because for a little while, the movie actually has atmosphere. There's something fun about seeing this ancient Egyptian chaos dropped into 1930s London. The British Museum setting works beautifully for this kind of story. Dark rooms, old relics, cursed objects, people making terrible decisions around dead things they should absolutely leave alone. It has that classic adventure movie setup. You can feel the film trying to recapture that feeling of discovery and danger from the first movie. And then, of course, the movie being the movie, it doesn't stay quiet for long. The bus chase is where that whole London section turns into full blockbuster mayhem. Mummies on a double-decker bus, characters flying through the city, danger coming from every direction. It is ridiculous, but in a pretty entertaining way. It's one of those sequences where you either laugh and go with it, or you fold your arms and say, okay, this is getting stupid. Personally, I think it works better than a lot of the later action scenes because it has a clear shape. The location is memorable, the danger is easy to understand, and the whole thing has a playful energy. It's not just another desert battle or CGI-heavy monster swarm, it has personality. It uses London as more than just a backdrop, but there is still a criticism here. Even this sequence shows the sequel's weakness for overkill. The first few minutes are fun, but the movie keeps pushing harder, more noise, more chaos, more impossible escapes. It does not always trust the setup enough to let tension build naturally. Instead, it just keeps throwing action at the screen until the scene becomes less suspenseful and more like a carnival ride. Still, as an early set piece, the London opening and bus chase do their job. They bring the old-world adventure flavor, they get the audience moving, and they remind us that this franchise can be silly in a way that's actually enjoyable. It's not subtle, it's not especially believable, but it is memorable. And in a sequel this crowded, that counts for something. The airship sequences in The Mummy Returns are one of those details that feel completely ridiculous, but also kind of perfect for this movie. Because really, of course, this sequel has an airship. Why wouldn't it? We already have cursed bracelets, resurrected priests, ancient armies, jungle appearing in the desert, and a giant scorpion warrior waiting at the end of the story. So when a flying machine shows up and starts drifting over mountains and pyramids like something out of an old adventure poster, it somehow fits. And visually, I actually like it. There's something charming about that dirigible floating through this oversized fantasy world. It gives the movie a real pulp adventure flavor, not realistic, not even trying to be realistic, but romantic in that old serial kind of way. You look at it and immediately understand the tone. This is not a grounded historical adventure. This is the kind of movie where characters can hop into an airship and chase destiny across the desert. The design itself is fun too. It has that floating gondola look, almost elegant, almost silly, and it gives the film a different kind of visual texture. After so many tombs, chases, and creature attacks, the airship scenes open things up. They give the story a little sweep, a little height, a little breathing room, even though naturally, the movie cannot resist turning it into another emergency. That's where the criticism comes in. Like most things in The Mummy Returns, the airship sequences start with a cool idea and then get pushed into overkill. The film doesn't just let the image be beautiful or adventurous for long. Soon enough, there's danger, panic, effects work, impossible escapes, and another big visual crisis. It becomes less about atmosphere and more about keeping the action machine running, and some of the effects around it don't fully hold up. When the airship is just gliding through the scenery, it has charm. When the movie starts asking it to survive giant supernatural chaos, the illusion gets shakier. You can feel the ambition, but you can also feel the early 2000s CGI fighting for its life. Still, I'd rather have the airship in the movie than not. It's one of those weird, memorable touches that gives The Mummy Returns its personality. It may be silly, but it's the right kind of silly, big, theatrical, adventurous, and just strange enough to make the movie feel like a wild pulp comic brought to life. The pygmy mummies are probably one of the most love it or hate it parts of The Mummy Returns. And honestly, I kind of get both reactions. On one side, they are exactly the kind of weird little monsters this movie needs. They're fast, nasty, loud, chaotic, and they give the jungle sequence this sudden burst of creature feature energy. The movie is already ridiculous by that point, so when these little undead attackers come swarming out, it doesn't feel out of place. It feels like the film saying, all right, we've done the mummy, we've done the bracelet, we've done the Scorpion King, now let's throw in some tiny nightmare goblins too. And as pure creature action, they're fun. They chase, they swarm, they overwhelm. They give the hero something physical and immediate to react to. There's no long explanation needed, no ancient prophecy lecture, no complicated mythology. Just small, vicious monsters coming at everyone, and the characters have to run. Sometimes that kind of simple danger is exactly what this sequel does best. But then, of course, the CGI is doing a lot of heavy lifting. And not always gracefully. Some shots have energy, especially when the scene is moving fast. But when you really look at the creatures, they can feel rubbery, artificial, and a little too cartoonish. They don't always have the texture or weight that would make them genuinely scary. Instead of feeling like disgusting undead creatures crawling out of the jungle, they sometimes look like digital pests bouncing through a video game level. Still, I can't deny they're memorable. Maybe not in a polished, elegant way, but in a very Mummy Returns way. They're silly, creepy, frantic, and weirdly entertaining. The kind of monster idea that feels like it belongs in a B-movie adventure where subtlety left the building about an hour ago. So the pygmy mummies are not exactly terrifying, and they are definitely not flawless visually. But they do add flavor. They give the movie another burst of chaotic creature action, and in a sequel that is constantly chasing bigger and louder thrills, they at least bring a strange little spark of personality. Ah, the Evelyn versus Ankh-Sunamun duel. Now that's one of the moments in The Mummy Returns that actually delivers on excitement and stakes. Rachel Weisz and Patricia Velasquez go head-to-head in a fight that's both stylish and surprisingly intense. Evelyn has grown a lot since the first film. She's no longer just the damsel in distress. Here, she's confident, agile, and smart, and Weisz sells every move. She's calculating, she's quick, and she actually makes the duel feel like a real battle between equals. Velasquez, meanwhile, embodies the dangerous allure of Ankh-Sunamun perfectly. She's elegant, deadly, and every gesture is soaked in menace. You believe in her motivations and her power, at least enough to make Evelyn's struggle feel real. The chemistry, not romantic this time, but in terms of conflict, is electric. The duel is a good mix of practical stunts, wire work, and some CGI magic. It's choreographed well, fast-paced, and it keeps you on your toes without ever feeling completely out of control. The camera work highlights both the grace and the danger, letting the audience follow every swing, kick, and tumble. And this fight works on multiple levels. It's a visual spectacle, yes, but it also reinforces the story stakes. Evelyn is fighting not just for herself, but for her family and for the world. You get tension, stakes, and character development, all wrapped into one thrilling sequence. Of course, the film never lets it get too heavy or serious. There are still some moments of comic relief and over-the-top style, but this duel stands out because it actually makes you care. You're invested in the outcome, and it's one of the few sequences where the story, the characters, and the action all come together seamlessly. If there's one scene in The Mummy Returns that shows the potential of the cast and choreography working in harmony, this is it. It's slick, it's fun, and it's genuinely satisfying. One of the oddest problems with The Mummy Returns is that it has danger everywhere, but not always suspense. And that sounds strange because on paper, the movie is loaded with threats. Alex is kidnapped, Imhotep is back, The Scorpion King is waiting. The army of Anubis could destroy the world. There are monsters, traps, chases, fights, collapsing places. Basically, every adventure movie alarm bell is ringing at once. But somehow you don't always feel it. Part of the issue is that the movie moves too fast to let tension build. Suspense needs a little patience. You need that moment before the attack, the silence before something appears, the feeling that the characters are trapped and the audience has time to worry. Here, the movie often skips straight to the chaos. Something jumps out, someone runs, the music blasts, and then we're already on to the next sequence. It's exciting in bursts, sure, but it doesn't sink in emotionally. Even Alex being in danger should feel more intense than it does. He's Rick and Evelyn's son, so the stakes are personal. That should give the whole movie a strong emotional pull. But because Alex is written as this incredibly clever, oddly calm, mini-adventurer, the fear around him gets softened. You're not always worried for him. Sometimes you're just waiting to see what clue he leaves behind next. And that's the larger problem. The movie has scale, but not always weight. The world is supposedly at risk, but the tone is so jokey and frantic that the danger rarely feels heavy. Characters are constantly escaping at the last second. The heroes survive impossible situations so often that the suspense starts to fade. After a while, you don't think, how are they going to get out of this? You think, okay, who's going to show up just in time now? That doesn't mean the movie is boring all the way through. It has energy, it has spectacle, it has fun moments, but emotional involvement is different from being visually entertained. You can watch a giant action scene and still feel detached if the characters inside it don't seem truly vulnerable. And that's where The Mummy Returns struggles. It gives us constant peril, but not enough genuine fear. Constant movement, but not enough emotional pause. Constant noise, but not enough silence for suspense to actually breathe. So even though the movie is packed with life-or-death situations, the tension often feels strangely thin. You're watching the adventure happen, but you're not always inside it. The climax of The Mummy Returns is a perfect example of this movie's whole personality. Big, loud, entertaining, and also kind of falling apart right in front of you. On a story level, the setup is exciting enough. Everything has been building toward this final confrontation. Rick, Evelyn, Alex, Imhotep, Anck-Su-Namun, the Scorpion King, the army of Anubis. The movie has spent 2 hours throwing mythology at us, so by the time we reach the end, you do want some kind of giant payoff. And to be fair, there is fun in it. The energy is there. The stakes are massive. Characters are running around, fighting for their lives, trying to stop the end of the world, and the film clearly wants this to feel like the biggest moment possible. It has that old adventure serial feeling where everything comes crashing together at once, but then the visuals start getting in the way. The Scorpion King should be terrifying here. He should feel like the final boss of this whole supernatural nightmare. Instead, the CGI makes him look strangely weightless and unfinished. You're supposed to feel danger, but part of your brain is just staring at the screen thinking, oh no, that does not look good. And that's a real shame because the climax is not completely bad. There are pieces of it that work. The action has momentum. The heroes are still likable. The idea of Rick facing this ancient warrior while the larger battle unfolds is exactly the kind of pulpy nonsense this franchise is built for. But the final effect damages the experience. It pulls you out at the exact moment the movie needs you most invested. Instead of feeling awe, you notice the technology. Instead of fearing the Scorpion King, you're almost laughing at him. That's the frustrating thing. The climax has the shape of a satisfying finale, but not the visual strength to fully sell it. It is fun in that messy, over-the-top Mummy Returns way, but it is also the moment where the movie's CGI obsession comes back to bite it. So yes, the ending delivers noise, action, and spectacle. It gives the audience the big showdown it promised. But because the most important visual effect is so distracting, the climax ends up being memorable for the wrong reason. It wants to end with thunder. Instead, it ends with a half-finished digital scorpion stomping all over the tension. Let's talk rewatch value for The Mummy Returns, because that's an interesting one. On one hand, this sequel is so overstuffed and chaotic that you might think it wouldn't hold up for a second viewing. The plot is messy, the mythology is convoluted, and the CGI can be questionable to say the least. At first glance, it almost feels like a film you watch once, get your thrills, and move on. But here's the thing. There's enough energy, humor, and sheer spectacle that parts of it actually benefit from a second look. The action sequences, from the London bus chase to the desert battles to those ridiculous pygmy mummy attacks, are fun to see again, especially if you're in the mood to just enjoy a non-stop adventure. You start noticing little details you missed the first time, small bits of banter, creative stunt work, or how the production team built certain sets and shots. The cast also helps. Fraser, Weisz, Vosloo, they're all comfortable in these roles, and watching them riff off each other again is entertaining. Even the younger Alex has his moments that, while sometimes frustrating, are also amusing if you accept the movie for what it is. Of course, you're not going to find a tighter plot or deeper character development on a rewatch. The story doesn't get any clearer, and the Scorpion King CGI still looks absurd. But if you're here for the family-friendly chaos, the over-the-top adventure, and a bit of nostalgic fun, it's actually kind of enjoyable to revisit. So, in a weird way, the rewatch value comes from its flaws as much as its strengths. It's loud, it's silly, it's messy, and that's exactly why you can go back to it for a mindless, adrenaline-fueled ride without feeling like you've lost anything. Sometimes, a popcorn movie doesn't need to be perfect to be fun again. The thing about The Mummy Returns is that, whatever you think of the movie as a piece of storytelling, it absolutely understood its audience. This was not some quiet little sequel hoping people would discover it later. This was a big studio adventure movie built for crowds. Families, teenagers, fans of the first film, people who just wanted monsters and explosions on a weekend, that was the target. And honestly, the movie gives that audience exactly what it came for. You liked Rick and Evelyn, they're back. You liked the Mummy, he's back too. You wanted more action. Here, have a bus chase, an airship, pygmy mummies, desert battles, and an undead army. You wanted something bigger than the first movie. Well, now the fate of the world is tied to the Scorpion King and the army of Anubis. It is very easy to criticize that as commercial filmmaking, because it is. The movie is clearly designed to be bigger, louder, and more marketable than the original. It even introduces Dwayne Johnson's Scorpion King in a way that feels like the studio is already thinking beyond this film. You can almost hear the franchise machinery warming up in the background. But here's the thing, audiences often respond to that kind of confidence. Not everyone goes to a movie like this looking for a perfectly structured script or deep character work. Sometimes people want scale, they want familiar heroes, they want jokes, danger, monsters, romance, and a big finish. The Mummy Returns delivers all of that without hesitation. That's why its popularity makes sense. Even with the bad CGI, even with the messy plot, even with the overstuffed mythology, the film has a very clear entertainment value. It is easy to watch with a group. It has enough humor for casual viewers, enough action for blockbuster fans, and enough family adventure energy to make it feel accessible. Critically, you can poke holes in it all day, and to be fair, many of those holes are huge. But commercially and emotionally, for a certain audience, the movie works because it is generous. It keeps giving you things, maybe too many things, but still, it never feels stingy, so its box office appeal is not a mystery. The Mummy Returns may not be the cleanest sequel, or the smartest, or even the best looking in places, but it knew how to sell a good time, and sometimes, for a summer adventure movie, that is more than enough to fill seats. The interesting thing about The Mummy Returns is that it doesn't just feel like a sequel. It feels like a sequel that is already looking past itself. You can sense the franchise thinking all over it. The first Mummy was a hit, so naturally the studio wanted to keep the adventure going. Bring back Rick and Evelyn, resurrect Imhotep again, add a bigger mythology, give the audience more monsters, more action, more ancient chaos. That part makes sense. It's standard sequel logic, but then the movie introduces the Scorpion King, and suddenly it feels like the franchise is trying to open another door while the current story is still happening. And look, the idea is not bad. A cursed warrior, a deal with Anubis, an undead army, this whole ancient legend sitting underneath the main plot that absolutely fits the world. It gives the sequel a bigger mythological scale. It makes the story feel like there are older and darker forces beyond Imhotep. But at the same time, the Scorpion King never fully feels like he belongs to this movie. He feels like a character being positioned for later. The film keeps building him up, talking about him, pointing toward him, but he doesn't get enough actual character work to become a great villain here. He is more like a franchise seed planted in the middle of the plot. And of course that seed grew. The Scorpion King spin-off makes sense from a business point of view. Dwayne Johnson had screen presence, the character had a simple hook, and the world of the Mummy was already built for pulpy side adventures. You can easily imagine the studio thinking, why stop with one cursed Egyptian storyline when we can build a whole shelf of sword and sandal spin-offs? That's where The Mummy Returns becomes a little fascinating. It is not just continuing the original film, it is expanding the brand. It wants to be bigger than one adventure. It wants mythology that can branch out, characters that can carry other stories, and a universe that can keep producing sequels. The downside is that you can feel the machinery. Instead of the Scorpion King feeling like a fully satisfying part of Rick and Evelyn's story, he sometimes feels like a commercial preview, and that slightly weakens the movie. It turns part of the climax into setup. It makes the mythology feel less organic and more strategic. Still, that is also part of the sequel's identity. The Mummy Returns is a messy bridge between the charm of the original and the larger franchise ambitions that followed. It gives fans another ride with the O'Connells, but it also starts pushing the series towards spin-offs, bigger lore, and more marketable mythology. So as a continuation, it works in a loud, uneven way. As a franchise launcher, it is almost more important than it is elegant. It may not handle every new piece gracefully, but it does prove one thing: this world had enough monsters, curses, and ancient nonsense to keep Hollywood digging for more. So final thoughts on The Mummy Returns. It is messy, very messy, but it is not boring, and that counts for something. This is the kind of sequel that takes everything people liked about the first movie and then just starts adding more weight on top. More action, more villains, more mythology, more CGI, more jokes, more family drama, more supernatural nonsense. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it feels like the movie is one more subplot away from collapsing into the sand. But there is still a lot of charm here. Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz remain the heart of the film. Their chemistry still works, the adventure energy is still alive, and the movie absolutely understands how to deliver big popcorn entertainment. If you want tombs, curses, monsters, airships, sword fights, sandstorms, and characters running from one impossible disaster to the next, The Mummy Returns gives you all of that with zero hesitation. The problem is that it gives you almost too much. The first film had a cleaner balance. It had action, humor, horror, romance, and spectacle, but it knew how to let those pieces breathe. This sequel is louder and busier. It trades some of that original charm for pure escalation. The story gets tangled, the suspense gets thinner, the horror is mostly gone, and the CGI, especially near the end, becomes impossible to defend with a straight face. And yet I cannot fully dislike it, because even when it is ridiculous, it has energy. Even when the plot is nonsense, the cast keeps it watchable. Even when the effects look rough, there is still imagination behind the spectacle. It feels like a big, chaotic Saturday night adventure, made by people who wanted to entertain the audience as aggressively as possible. Is it as good as the 1999 original? No, not really. It is less fresh, less tight, and much more uneven. Is it still fun? Yeah, in the right mood, absolutely. That is the strange legacy of The Mummy Returns. It is not a great sequel, but it is a memorable one. It is flawed, overstuffed, loud, silly, sometimes embarrassing, and occasionally genuinely exciting. It proves that more of the same can still be enjoyable, but it also proves that more is not always better. For fans of cheesy adventure movies, there is still plenty to enjoy here. For anyone looking for sharp storytelling or convincing effects, this one is going to test your patience. But as a big, goofy, family-friendly blockbuster ride, it still has a pulse, and sometimes, with a movie this chaotic, that pulse is enough.